I never thought an ordinary Tuesday morning would turn into the moment my entire neighborhood tried to rip away everything I'd built: my peace, my property, and my lake. But if you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA, then you already know, they don't knock, they invade. And on that morning, standing on my own shoreline, I realized they were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. The hook. They thought the lake belonged to them. But they had no idea I secretly owned every single dock they were standing on. It started with a pounding on my front door, the kind that tells you whoever's outside isn't here to talk, they're here to take. When I opened it, the HOA president, Linda, stood there with her arms crossed so tight her clipboard was shaking. She didn't even say hello. Effective immediately, she announced, the Homeowners Association is assuming control of the lake and all connected structures. That includes your dock. My dock? The one I built with my own hands? The one on land my family had owned long before this HOA even existed? I could feel my pulse thundering, but I kept my voice calm. On what grounds? She lifted the clipboard like it was a royal decree. Because it's community property now. The board voted. Behind her, 3 other HOA members nodded smugly like they were delivering a sentence, not a decision. Before I could respond, they marched past me and headed straight toward the water. I followed them, each step adding fuel to a fire they didn't know they were igniting. By the time we reached the shoreline, the HOA members were already pointing at the docks, discussing new rules and usage fees as if the place belonged to them. That's when Linda turned and gave the line that lit the fuse. From today onward, all docks are HOA assets. You are no longer their owner. I stared at them, everyone standing confidently right on top of structures I knew, legally and quietly, were 100% mine. They thought I was powerless. They thought a vote could erase years of documented ownership. They thought they could bully me into surrendering what was rightfully mine. They had no clue that locked inside my office drawer was the one thing that would destroy their claim completely. A stack of hidden documents proving I owned every dock on this lake long before their HOA was even formed. And soon, they were going to regret stepping on my property, literally. As the HOA members strutted around the lake like self-appointed royalty, I quietly slipped back toward my house. Every step I took felt heavier, not with fear, but with the weight of what was coming. They thought they had cornered me. They thought a clipboard and a vote could rewrite reality. But the truth was sitting 3 drawers down in my office file cabinet waiting like a legal time bomb. I shut the door behind me and headed straight to the cabinet. The familiar metallic clunk of the lock opening felt like the click of fate lining up in my favor. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the one I rarely touched. Inside was a thin, labeled folder I hadn't needed in years, Lake and Dock Ownership Original Records. I brushed off the dust and opened it. There they were. Deeds. Permits. Surveys. Purchase agreements. Every document stamped, signed, and legally binding. The lake wasn't community property. It wasn't HOA property. It wasn't even shared. It was mine. And not kinda, sorta, technically mine. I legally owned every dock, the shoreline they stood on, and the upkeep rights that came with all of it. But here's the part that would make the HOA choke: their own charter had a clause stating they could not override any pre-existing property rights predating the formation of the association. Guess what? My ownership dated back 20 years before their first meeting. I took a deep breath, slid the documents into a binder, and walked back outside. The HOA members were still at the lake, measuring things with a tape measure, arguing about what new dock maintenance fees to charge the neighborhood. As I approached, Linda turned, her voice dripping with self-importance. If you're here to negotiate, we can discuss your compliance timeline. The board wants your dock inspected by Friday. I smiled, a calm, slow, confident smile that instantly made her frown. I'm not here to negotiate, I said. I'm here to show you something. I set the binder on the nearest dock post and opened it. The spotless papers glowed in the afternoon sun like they were blessed by the legal gods themselves. "What's this?" Linda snapped. "Proof," I said. "Proof that you're standing on property I own. Every dock. Every board. Every inch." Her eyes scanned the first document. The second. Then the third. Each one chipping away at her confidence like a hammer to glass. Behind her, the other HOA members leaned in, their smug expressions melting into confusion and then panic. "This can't be right," she whispered. But it was. And we were only getting started. The moment Linda realized what she was holding, her entire posture changed. The clipboard that she once wielded like a weapon now hung limp at her side. Her eyes darted from the documents to the dock beneath her feet, as if the wood might suddenly vanish. The other HOA members stepped back, unsure whether to defend her or distance themselves entirely. "This has to be a mistake," Linda said, though her voice had already lost its edge. "These documents must be outdated." I shook my head slowly. "They're the originals. Every permit, every deed, every survey. All of it predates your HOA by nearly 2 decades. One of the board members, Greg, gulped loudly. "So, you're saying we don't own any of this?" I raised an eyebrow. "Not a plank. Not a nail. And according to your charter, you have no authority to regulate any structure built before the HOA was established." Greg's face drained of color. "Linda, didn't we check that clause?" She snapped. "I thought it only applied to buildings, not docks." I couldn't help but smile. "Docks count. It's right there in your own paperwork." They all looked at each other, panic spreading like wildfire. Suddenly, the members who had marched in behind Linda with such confidence were whispering nervously, casting blame before anyone officially admitted defeat. Linda attempted one last stand. "Even if you own the docks, the lake is still community property. So we still have control over usage." Her voice wavered at the end. She knew she was losing ground. I turned to the final page in the binder and held it up. "Actually, no. Here's the lake deed. It's privately owned. By me. Specifically." Silence. Dead, heavy silence. Greg let out a groan. "Oh my God." Another board member rubbed his forehead. "We sent violation notices, on his own lake." I nodded. "You did?" Linda's face flushed red. This is unbelievable. Why didn't you tell us you owned everything?" I gave her the truth, because I didn't owe you that information. And I wasn't going to hand over decades of rights just because the HOA wanted to flex its power. For the first time since they'd stormed onto my property, Linda looked genuinely at a loss. "Well," she muttered, scanning for a lifeline, "the board will need time to review these documents." I crossed my arms. "Take all the time you need. Just make sure you're off my docks while you do it." The board froze. One by one, they stepped off the dock like it was a crime scene. But this wasn't over. Not even close. The HOA retreat might have looked like a victory, but I knew better. HOAs don't walk away quietly. They regroup. They plot. They come back with clipboards sharpened like knives. And sure enough, by the next morning, the backlash had already begun. I woke to the sound of voices outside, angry ones. When I stepped onto my porch, a small crowd of neighbors stood together, waving papers in their hands. Some looked confused, others irritated, and a few downright furious. "What's going on?" I asked. A neighbor named Carol stepped forward. "The HOA sent out an emergency bulletin. They're saying you forged documents to claim the docks and the lake." Of course. When you can't win with rules, you try to win with rumors. I took a breath. "Did they include any proof?" Carol shook her head. "Just statements. They're telling everyone that you're trying to privatize the entire lake." Suddenly, Linda appeared from behind the group, chin raised, pride barely patched together after yesterday's humiliation. "It is our duty," she declared loudly, "to protect community property from fraudulent claims." I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. "Fraudulent? You saw the original documents yourself." "They could be fabricated," she snapped. "Anyone can print something that looks official." I laughed under my breath. "Except these aren't printed. They're notarized, county-verified originals." A murmur rippled through the crowd. But Linda wasn't done. "Until the board finishes its investigation, we are instructing all residents to avoid using the docks. This is now a matter of public safety." "Public safety?" I repeated. "How exactly are they unsafe?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for me to know she was grasping. "Potential structural issues," she said. Carol frowned. "But the docks are perfectly fine." Linda shot her a glare. "For now. But ownership disputes can create liability. The association must act responsibly." I held up my binder. "If anyone here wants to see the real documents, every deed, every survey, every notarized stamp, my door is open." This time the crowd murmured louder. Neighbors exchanged looks, and a few even stepped toward me instead of Linda. That pushed her over the edge. "This isn't over," she hissed. "The board will escalate this to county authorities if we have to." I shrugged. "Good. Then you'll be bringing the case directly to the office that recorded these documents 20 years ago." The crowd dispersed slowly, torn between the two sides. But one thing was clear: the HOA wasn't backing down, and neither was I. Because the next move, that would finally force everything into the open. The HOA wanted a war, and now they were about to get one, but not on their turf. Linda made good on her threat by filing a formal complaint with the county. She claimed fraudulent ownership, tampered records, and even intentional deception for personal gain. In her mind, she was exposing a villain. In reality, she was marching her whole board straight into the jaws of a legal buzzsaw. A week later, we were all summoned to the county administration building. The hearing room was small, but the tension squeezed every inch of space. HOA members sat together in a tight cluster, whispering strategies like they were preparing for a courtroom drama. I walked in with one thing: the binder. The same binder they had pretended wasn't real. At the front of the room sat the county recorder, Ms. Alvarez, a woman known for having a memory sharper than her glasses. She glanced at the paperwork the HOA had submitted, then at my documents, then back at Linda. "Let's begin," she said firmly. Linda stood up, placing a stack of printed statements on the table. "We are here today because Mr. She gestured at me as though I were a defendant in a crime, is claiming private ownership over community property. The docks, the shoreline, even the lake. We believe the documents he presented are fabricated." Ms. Alvarez looked at her without blinking. "Fabricated? On what basis?" Linda hesitated. "They appear unusually convenient." Across the table, I almost laughed. Ms. Alvarez motioned toward me. "Mister, your response." I opened the binder and slid out the deeds, one by one, placing them on the table with deliberate calm. "These are the original documents. Not copies. Not printouts. Originals recorded by this very office. If you check your archives, you'll find the matching entries." She nodded, adjusting her glasses as she picked up the first deed. "Ah yes. 2003. I remember updating this section myself." I watched the HOA's confidence crumble. Ms. Alvarez continued flipping through the documents, occasionally cross-referencing her digital records. With each confirmation, the board's posture deflated a little more. Finally, she pushed the papers aside and addressed them directly. "There is no fraud here. The lake and all dock structures were privately purchased and legally recorded long before your association was formed. You have no jurisdiction over them. Linda's jaw hung open. Greg placed a hand over his face. Another board member muttered, "Oh no." But Ms. Alvarez wasn't finished. Furthermore, she added, issuing violation notices on property outside your authority is a misuse of HOA power. I strongly advise you cease immediately. The HOA had lost. Completely and publicly. But I wasn't done, not yet. Walking out of the county building felt like stepping into sunlight after weeks in a storm. The HOA had been exposed not just to me, but in front of the very authorities they tried to weaponize. The weight of their defeat pressed down on them like a bag of wet cement. But instead of accepting it, they did what desperate people always do. They doubled down. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door, the HOA's logo printed in the corner like a badge of false authority. I pulled it off, opened it, and couldn't help laughing. Inside was a brand new violation notice. Reason: failure to comply with HOA dock alignment standards. Penalty: $750 fine. Dock alignment standards on my docks. It was almost impressive how quickly they managed to humiliate themselves. A few minutes later, I heard shouting near the lake. When I walked outside, I saw Linda and two board members marching across the grass with a level, a measuring tape, and a camera. They were inspecting the docks again, photographing angles, scribbling on clipboards, acting like the county hearing had never happened. "You're trespassing," I called out. Linda spun around, her voice sharp and brittle. "We are performing an official HOA inspection. On privately owned property." I asked. "After the county told you to stop." One of the members lowered his clipboard. "Linda, maybe we shouldn't. We have authority over all structures connected to the community," she snapped. "No," I corrected calmly. "You want authority. But wanting isn't the same as having." She stomped toward me until we were only a few feet apart. "You think you can embarrass us and just walk away? The board won't be undermined." I held up my phone, already recording. "Then by all means, keep explaining why you're illegally inspecting my property after the county confirmed I own everything." The second board member tugged at Linda's arm. "He's filming. We need to go." But Linda ripped her arm free. "No. I'm not afraid of him." "You should be afraid of the law," I said. "Because if you set foot on my docks again, I'll file trespassing charges. And unlike your claims, mine actually have evidence behind them." Her face twisted, a mixture of rage, humiliation, and denial. "You can't threaten the HOA." "I'm not threatening," I replied. "I'm informing." For a moment, she stood there trembling. Then finally, the fight drained out of her. She snapped her clipboard shut and barked, "Fine. This isn't over." But everyone around her knew it was. Her authority had cracked. The board's unity was splintering. And what came next would finally push everything to the breaking point. Word travels fast in a neighborhood, especially when the HOA is collapsing in real time. Within days of their final meltdown at the lake, the whole community knew about the county ruling, the trespassing fiasco, and the absurd dock fines they tried to issue afterward. What the board had counted on for years, fear, confusion, and quiet compliance, was starting to slip through their fingers. And it all began with a single text message. Carol, the neighbor who had always tried to stay neutral, sent a message in the community group chat. "Why did the HOA lie about lake ownership? We deserve answers." That was all it took. The chat exploded. Dozens of messages poured in: questions, complaints, screenshots, photos of the bogus violation notices, even clips of Linda's tantrum on the dock. People who had been silent for years suddenly found their courage. By noon, the HOA board had called an emergency community meeting in the clubhouse. I wasn't planning to attend. I'd already beaten them where it mattered legally. But when 3 neighbors knocked on my door, all asking the same thing: "Please come. They're blaming you. Well, that got my attention. When I walked into the clubhouse, the atmosphere felt like a courtroom moments before a verdict. Neighbors filled every seat. Some stood in the back. And up front, the HOA board sat behind a folding table, looking like defendants pretending to be judges. Linda stood first. Her smile was tight enough to snap. "We called this meeting," she began, "because misinformation has been circulating about the lake situation. As your HOA president, I want to reassure everyone that we are working in your best interest." A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. Carol raised her hand. "Is it true you accused him of fraud even after seeing original documents?" Linda stiffened. "I cannot discuss ongoing board matters." Another neighbor jumped in. "Is it true you filed a false complaint with the county?" "That is a mischaracterization," Linda snapped. A man from the back shouted, "Is it true you trespassed on property the county confirmed wasn't yours?" The room erupted. Finally, someone said the words the board had been dreading. "We want to hear from him. Let him speak." Linda visibly panicked. "He's not recognized by the board." But the crowd didn't care about board rules anymore. They were done being controlled. "Go ahead," someone said. "Tell us what really happened." I stepped forward, slowly, calmly, binder in hand. Every eye in the room locked on me. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was about breaking the HOA's grip on the entire community. And they were about to hear everything. I walked to the front of the clubhouse with the binder tucked under my arm. The room quieted instantly. Even the board members sat frozen, caught between dread and defiance. I placed the binder on the table, right in front of them, and turned to face the community. "Most of you know bits and pieces of what happened," I began. "But today, I'm going to show you everything." I opened the binder and lifted the first document. This is the original deed to the lake. Purchased privately by me 20 years ago. Recorded by the county. Verified last week in front of the HOA board. I handed it to the nearest neighbor. They examined it with wide eyes before passing it to the next person. A ripple of whispers filled the room. Next, I held up the dock permits. These were approved years before the HOA even existed. Every board member here saw these documents with their own eyes. Linda shifted uncomfortably, her jaw tight. Those documents could have been altered. I cut her off gently. If they were, the county would have seen it. They checked. They confirmed every signature, every notary stamp, every date. And they informed your board, right there in the hearing, that the HOA has no jurisdiction. I watched the room react: shock, anger, disbelief. Then I took a breath and continued. Instead of accepting the ruling, the board doubled down. They issued fake violation notices. They trespassed on private property. They accused me of fraud in front of the community. And they spread misinformation to protect their pride. Now the crowd erupted. "Is that true? Why would you lie to us? You tried to fine him after the county said no." Linda shot to her feet, pounding the table. "Everything we did was for community safety." A neighbor shouted back, "By trespassing." Another added, "By threatening people with fines you had no authority to issue." The board members exchanged looks: panicked, cornered, exposed. I raised my hand, and the room quieted again. This isn't about just one lake. Or one dock. Or one complaint. This is about power. About an HOA that forgot it serves the community, not the other way around. The tension in the room shifted. I could feel it. People weren't just upset. They were ready for change. Today, I said, the community deserves a transparent board. One that doesn't abuse authority. One that doesn't operate in secrecy. One that isn't afraid of accountability. A neighbor stood. I motioned to hold a vote of no confidence. Another stood. I second it. Linda's face went white. The meeting was about to take a turn she couldn't stop. The clubhouse shifted from chaos to charged silence as the words "I motion to hold a vote of no confidence" echoed through the room. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, the power didn't sit with the HOA board or their clipboards, it sat with the people. Linda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from one neighbor to another, searching desperately for anyone to speak up for her. But all she saw were crossed arms, narrowed eyes, and residents who were finally done being pushed around. Ms. Patel, a quiet neighbor who had never raised her voice before, stood tall. "We trusted you," she said to the board. "We trusted you with our homes, our fees, our peace. And you used that trust to bully people." Someone else added, "We deserve leadership that respects the law." Another neighbor chimed in, "And respects us." The seconding of the motion was already done, but now half the room was verbally piling on. The board members shrank back, or rather, all but Linda did. She stood stiff, trembling with anger and humiliation. "This is ridiculous," she barked. "You can't just vote out an entire board because you don't like a decision. HOA rules clearly state." A neighbor interrupted loudly, "We read the rules. Section 4B, a vote of no confidence can be initiated if the board acts outside its legal authority." A wave of agreement swept through the room. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The community was speaking for itself. Greg, the board treasurer, finally stood and cleared his throat. Maybe we made mistakes. Maybe we acted too fast." Linda swung toward him. "Don't you dare turn your back on us." But Greg was done. "I'm not turning my back. I'm facing reality. We were wrong." With that sentence, the room shifted permanently. The board fractured. Two members stepped away from the table. The crowd murmured. People nodded. A sense of relief washed through the room, like a door finally opening after being jammed shut for years. Linda realized she was losing control. "If you vote us out," she warned, "you'll regret it. None of you know how to run an HOA. None of you know what it takes." A neighbor stood. "We know it takes honesty." Another. "Respect." Another. "And not abusing power." Finally, the vote was called. Hands shot up. Row after row. More than 2/3. Enough to remove the entire board on the spot. Linda's face collapsed. She grabbed her clipboard, her papers, her remaining pride, and stormed out without another word. The rest of the board quietly followed. The community had spoken. And the lake, my lake, was finally free from the grip of people who never owned it in the first place. The neighborhood didn't just win back its peace. It won back its voice.